Welcome everyone, thank you for joining us today. We've got 4 lovely students from Harper Adams University and we are delighted to be supporting COP, Countryside COP, and I'm going to introduce you to 4 of our students. So first of all we have Georgie Lee. Georgie Lee's 23 from Cheshire and graduated from Harper this year in rural estate and land management. She looks forward to starting her career as a graduate surveyor back in her home county and continuing in her chairmanship for the local Young Farmers Club. Next we have Matt Butterfield. Matt is a final year ag student at Harper Adams, also hailing from a non-farming background in Dorset. Matt is particularly passionate about biological dairy farming, seeking to farm in his own right in this area. In his spare time, Matt enjoys playing his violin wherever possible, be it in a local orchestra, barn dances, and in his church in Stafford. Lauren McKinley Amos is 22, a final year ag student at Harper Adams and comes from South Bucks. Her interests are in pasture-led farming systems and sustainable regen ag. She hopes to work up to having a farm of her own when she graduates in 2025, focusing mainly on sustainable farming practices. Lauren is also from a non-farming background. And then lastly, we've got Tom Spencer. Tom is 25, a part-time postgraduate student studying a Masters in International Agribusiness and Food Chain Management at Harper, having completed his undergraduate degree in agriculture with farm business management at Harper as well. With this, he hopes to have a full grasp of sustainable success across the supply chain from farm to fork. He comes from an arable farm down in Kent with a small suckler herd. He currently works for the AHDB as a trainee analyst with a keen interest in all things agriculture, economics, policy and trade. So we're going to kick off with a few questions. We're going to have a really nice chat with our panellists this afternoon. So first of all, Tom, I'm going to send the first question to you. We're thinking about sustainable production, and it's something every farmer wants, right? Nobody's setting out to make less money or destroy the environment or jeopardise food security in so doing. So what do you think are the barriers, Tom, to making the transition?
Firstly, thank you, Alex, for that lovely introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. In terms of barriers, I think the first thing to mention is we can't stand still. I think every farmer has got to appreciate the way the industry is moving. Standing still isn't an option. When we're looking at the physical barriers themselves, you've got the sustainability economically, not only environmentally. I think those are the two have got to come hand in hand. If you've got farms that are performing better sustainably, that doesn't necessarily come with the money that farms are there to produce. Without a profit margin, there will be no more farms in the UK. The barriers are a lot to do with that inability to accept change potentially. It's farmers that have got a way of operating, but things are changing around them. New products are available, new technology is becoming available every year. You can go around any agricultural show these days and there will be dozens, if not hundreds of new products, and very exciting place to be. But when we're looking at which ones we can enable, being open to that change is definitely the key barrier that we need to overcome. Sure.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I'm sure the others agree. There's certainly something about that, the social aspect of what you're talking about, which I think is really, really interesting. Can farmers be open to this? What are the barriers from the upward part of the supply chain? What are the forces that are affecting their ability to make decisions about how they make the transition on farm? So loads of interesting stuff in your answer there. Lauren, I'll come to you. What do you think? What's your take on how straightforward the transition is for farmers?
Yeah, I think it can be straightforward, but I think because of the way that farmers are brought up in their family homes and their opinions that they're brought up in that lifestyle, it's very hard for someone to change a habit of a lifetime almost. And I think it's also hard to have someone come up to you and say, well, you need to be doing this, when your whole life you've been doing something else, and in your eyes that might be working, and you don't know whether that system and whether changing everything you're doing will work, and what are you going to do if it doesn't. So it's very tricky to kind of change when you don't know and you're not in the know.
Yeah. And the fear of messing up is a very real thing, isn't it? Nobody wants to be the successor that gets it wrong, and I think that's also a real social challenge that is very real. Matt, we can come to you. So your interest, of course, is in dairy. So yes. I'm conscious you come at it from that perspective. But what's your view on this?
So I'd have said actually social sustainability is. I'd have said that if we consider sustainability as 3 pillars, you mentioned economic, you mentioned environmental, social, it has to happen. The dairy sector is infamous for long hours and on very cold and wet days and whatever, and that is off-putting to people. And I think when we look at the RABDF survey, which says that 63% of dairy farmers are struggling to recruit staff, I think that aspect we need to look at, in that how can we show people and get the message out there that dairy farming actually is a rewarding career, but one that also allows a family life to not just exist, but to flourish alongside.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Georgie?
All I'd have to add really is that since obviously we're moving away from BPS, basic payment scheme, and we're now, the way our agricultural support system is now working is farmers aren't just farming for food and for the countryside and environment, they're farming for public goods, which is a whole shift in a mindset to actually farming for something that they can't see and they don't directly benefit from, but it does benefit the wider community, the wider environment. And I think to make that change, it needs to be incentivised, and then it's a long-term goal. So they've got to transition into that mindset, and then they'll see the benefit of it in a few years. But like they farm annually, they see the crops grow, so they see the benefit straight away there of adding a different type of fertiliser or doing a different type of tillage method, whereas farming for public goods isn't necessarily going to see that immediate impact and gain straight away.
Yeah, I agree. It's really interesting. So moving the conversation, but not too far away from that, we're considering the economics of farming, which is of course a big imperative. Matt, you just touched on that with those 3 pillars that you talked about. So we can all agree, can't we, that rural communities depend upon agriculture. They're a critical sort of pillar of rural community. Mechanisation, globalisation, changes in markets and other factors have led to lower profitability and job losses in some cases. Do we agree? Lauren, I'm going to come to you with this one. Do we agree with that? Do we think that's fair? Do we think that's accurate? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's very tricky in this day and age where you're a farmer and you're trying to make as much profit as you can, but you've got a consumer who wants food as cheaply as possible. And it's very hard to balance that out when you've got everything in between. You've got things going on where it's causing fertiliser prices to increase, and you can have a bad cropping year and that can increase. And it's looking at, is that going to impact the consumer or the farmer? And if it's impacting the farmer and they're a small family farm, they're not going to be able to do that for much longer. You look at things like dairy farms. A lot of dairy farms nowadays are becoming larger, small scale dairy farms. They don't really, they're not really that popular anymore. Then you don't see many of them. And I think it's having to change a system to suit that. But at the same time, people are going to lose their jobs. You've got robotic milking coming in. AI is a new one that is becoming more and more popular. And, we don't fully know the capabilities of that yet, but there's going to be something out there that can help with farming. So I think that's another thing. And also the impact of, I think we're still having a bit of impact with COVID. There's not that many people who are coming from overseas to help with crops and pick fruit and things like that. There's not a lot of that anymore either. So yeah, I think definitely agree with that.
Thank you. Matt, what do you think?
Well,
mechanisation, the ruin of agriculture?
Do I think it's the ruin of agriculture? No, I don't think so. I think it's made it more efficient in many ways. Take from that what you will, whether that's a good or a bad thing. I believe that it feeds more people. For example, and those people can be engaged in work elsewhere. But for example, there are various arable farms I know of where in the 1970s and 80s they employed a dozen people, particularly during the harvest period. Now they do it with one. And when you start hearing things like that, you think, well, what do all those people do? Well, the answer is they have moved elsewhere. And to be honest, I think a lot of them, that was a conscious decision. I mean, you look at the Victorian period in history, and there was that mass movement of labour from the countryside into the cities. And I don't think that what we see now is anything out of the ordinary on that front. As I said earlier, I think mechanisation is a good thing because it's enabling the mass feeding of more people. But I like to say with everything, there's a sweet spot. I think there has to be the human skill that remains, because if we end up giving everything over to, well, in the case of arable farming, often GPS and things like that, if we give all those skills over and rely on the technology and something happens, say there's a cyber attack or something, everything goes down, we need that skill base still there. So it's a double-edged sword, definitely.
Yeah.
Just off the back of that, Matt, I think that mechanisation is great for efficiency and sort of making up for that lack in the workforce, but it doesn't replace good husbandry. And good husbandry feeds into designing that technology, feeds into designing that mechanisation. Why are we trying to reduce our soil compaction? Well, that's to feed into the environment and make our farming more sustainable, which then feeds into better food produce and so on and so forth. So I think that you're never going to replace good husbandry with a machine, with a robot, but it's how that works together.
Yeah, all great points. So moving on, and I'm going to come back to you, Matt, for this one. So if we're thinking about yield and efficiency as part of the sustainable production imperative, how do we balance the need for yield and increased efficiency with the imperative of sustainability in mind?
So I think like with so many of these things, it really does vary on a farm-to-farm basis. So for example, take a 500-acre dairy farm. If that farm is ring-fenced, it suits very well having a grazing system with the cows in the middle. If that's 500 acres over 10 parcels, you would say, well, we need to bring the feed to the cows, therefore we need to have the cows indoors, etc. That could be the argument. What I would say is that when I specifically label my interest as biological dairy farming, I think biological dairy farming is when we make the most of the soil and the land that we have to produce the maximum quantity of food. So where I've just worked for my placement, we are registered organic, but on our best silage land, which is grass and clovers, we grow up to 14 tonnes of dry matter a hectare, which, considering that some of the best conventional ones are doing 16, and we're not doing that with any artificials. We're using slurries, we're using farmyard manures, and we're using things like molasses and liquid seaweed. So we're really making the most of these natural resources to grow the highest quality feed, because if we get the soil right, the feed comes, and we get the feed right, we get the cows right. And that therefore means that we're not feeding empty calories to people, we're feeding the most high quality nutritious food possible. So I think it starts in the soil and it finishes up with us, is what I'd say to that.
Yeah. Do you think as a bit of a supplementary question for you, Matt, and for the rest of the panel, do we think that the consumer appreciates that? And we'll talk more about this later, but I just want to pick up on that. Do we think the consumer understands that you're using seaweeds and farmyard manures to care for the soil? I mean, I agree with you that soil is everything. So could you just expand on that just some more?
I think they do. And I think we'll touch on this again later, but sadly there is the disconnect in many ways between the producers and the consumers. I think those consumers who actually hear about it get really, really excited about the idea that you can use seaweed. So you think, well, on the Channel Islands they use seaweed to grow potatoes and have done for years, but in a dairy sense, who's heard of that? But I think when we can get people excited about the idea that your food isn't coming out of a chemical works, it's coming out of the ground, and actually that the cows, I would say to anyone to look at the cows that were under my care during placement. Just come and look. I mean, they are absolutely thriving, happy, healthy cows, and they were in a grass system. But I believe that applying those same principles to even a high yielding system, indoor housed, I believe that you'd still find every bit as happy cows. But it's just, the system just depends on what you're trying to do and what you can do with land limitations.
That connection between the consumer and the farmer, I'd like to say, is improving. A recent study's come out and said that farmers are the second most trusted profession, only behind doctors and nurses, and that's ahead of teachers. So I think that appreciation is coming back from where it has been, whether that's through social media and farming being more of a visible profession, whether that's good old Clarkson's Farm and really promoting and showing what farming actually is. It's not just I get stuck behind a farmer on my way to work and I'm annoyed. It's I appreciate where my food's coming from. And when you look at the benefits of putting a photo of a farm on a product in the supermarket, that is boosting that sale because people are appreciating it. They trust that's where it comes from. And when you mention you want to see the cows on your placement, well, this is what the consumer wants. They want trust that what the farming industry is producing is high quality. It's to high standards as well.
Similarly though, actually in opposition to that, I feel like some supermarkets abuse the use of saying it's come from a farm. And one thing I noticed, I won't name the supermarket chain, but in their meat aisle, they'd come up with a farm name, so let's call it Orchards Farm Meat. And actually, if you looked at the back of it, it wasn't from it was from mixed EU farms, which I thought was a total abuse of the naive consumer. They'd actually used branding, which was Union Jack colours. So whilst they didn't do the Union Jack, which obviously symbolises that it's come from UK farms and that it's, the farm assured with the tractor, whilst they didn't do those logos, they had that type of branding and that colour, which we naturally associate with being from the UK. And I thought that was a huge abuse of the naive consumer to get them to buy cheaper food thinking it's from the UK.
Yeah, and I actually, on top of that, as part of my project that I'm doing this year, I've had to research into that. And I can't remember how long ago it was, but in the news, I think they'd actually done a report on it. And there were multiple supermarkets who were doing the same thing. And some of those supermarkets actually apologised and corrected it. But there are still a few out there who haven't changed it. And actually, when you look at it, it is a mixture of farms. And it has a one named farm on there. And you try to look up that farm and it doesn't come up. And it doesn't even exist anywhere. It's not even like they get the animals into one place. They are literally just
all over.
Just branding.
But then Riverfords are fighting back over it. They've literally launched a campaign within the last few weeks saying we want to stop. They call it farm washing, don't they? I think.
Yeah, or fake. I think fake farms is another.
That's it. Yeah, fake. And it's that. I think the fight back is there, and there's certainly the will to make it happen. Because I think while many people still want to need to buy cheap food in order to make ends meet, I think at the same time they don't want to feel that they've been lied to, and they don't want to feel that they've been sold a product that actually is it's a complete forgery, really.
Moving forward, when you're touching back to the sustainability, I think in my opinion, moving forward, as a fake farm can't have a carbon emission. You can't fabricate something. So I don't think personally moving forward that they will continue, because as all the trust is coming within the industry, as the supply chain links up and you're having to spell out your scope 3 emissions of all your farmers that you're trading with, if you're trading under a fake farm, well, yeah, that doesn't have a place within the supply chain, and hopefully for farmers' sake that will be a thing of the past.
Yeah, and also how do you identify as being sustainable and even as being a sustainable supermarket when your meat is coming from multiple different farms, you may know 5 out of 10 of those farms and be able to visit them and go, okay, well, they're all sustainable, and say that you're sustainable, but there might actually be 1 out of those 10 farms that is really, really unsustainable and aren't actually doing anything to meet the requirements that people want in their food.
Yeah. I want us to revisit some of this because this is really interesting discussion as we go on through. But just for a moment, I want us to think about, we're producing all this lovely food as food producers, and we've a challenge which is around some of the infrastructure deficits that we do have in rural communities. So, Georgie, I want to ask you. We've got all manner of considerations, haven't we, in rural communities? So we've got issues around roads and the condition of those roads. We've got broadband, healthcare, and other essential services that are often compromised in rural areas. So what I'm interested in is, what do you think that we could do to tackle some of these big issues that face rural communities?
Well, with regards to broadband, actually, there's recently been more legislation pushed in favour of broadband companies being able to just come on to the farm and essentially give them a very small payout for setting up connectivity towers,
Masts.
Masts, that's it now. And there used to be quite a good payout, so farmers would be happy to set up that lease agreement, and that obviously increases connectivity across countryside. But now it's a very small payment for the inconvenience of having a mast in the middle of the farm. It's not really very fair, but there is more legislation to give power to do that now. So then you could argue on the flip side of that, we have got more connectivity coming to rural areas. It's just a lot of cabling to do over a very short period of time. When it comes to the roads and things, I think we really need to look at like where is being used the most, those high traffic areas, and ensuring that they are always functional. I always get roadworks on anywhere I'm going. I have to allow an extra 20 minutes, half an hour to get anywhere locally, because there's always roadworks doing something, and it's a very last minute job. So I think as long as they're prioritised and we know the sort of lifespan of the roads and when they are going to be under more pressures, and maintenance ahead of that rather than being a last minute solution would be so much better to keep things flowing. So when they do it in the summer holidays on a weekend, and you've got, parents that are trying to get to some event that they've booked, farmers trying to cart grass, and then you've got myself trying to get to a job, it's too many people on the roads when they plan to do these roadworks.
Yeah, of course. And what do we think about healthcare? I'll put this across to the rest of the panel, because, of course, in rural communities, healthcare, it really is a challenge. I mean, we know, don't we, that in parts of North Wales where there's a good deal of farming happening in North Wales, one of the biggest challenges for that part of the world is that many of the practitioners that they're able to see, when they're able to see them, aren't first language Welsh speakers, which, of course, in itself is a unique kind of challenge that some of our farming communities will face. Any of you have a take on healthcare in rural communities?
I think we already struggle with healthcare in the UK, and a lot of it is to do with funding. A lot goes on about there being paid for it, and they want more pay. And actually, as part of that, recently as an agriculture community, we've had money taken out of our pot, per se. And surely that money could go towards, it doesn't necessarily have to go towards agriculture, but it could go towards more rural communities. It could go towards healthcare in those communities. Because if you had a farmer who had an accident or was ill, they don't go to the doctors because they think, I've got to get on and work. But if it was more easily accessible, easily available, they could go after work or at a time that was more convenient for them. And if we had that funding to help with that, then surely that would be something that would help fix a problem.
Yeah.
The accessibility, though, to healthcare is gone massively downhill since COVID, because everything went to online.
Yeah.
You know, it's unbelievable to ask a 96-year-old to ring up and then they get told to go online. My grandma doesn't even own a computer. So how is she supposed to be able to reorder a prescription or never mind book an appointment? And she can't do it over the phone anymore. Then you've got the barrier of they don't drive anymore. And then in rural communities, bus services are so limited. And they've got to walk to the bus stop, but then does the bus stop take them to a local practice? Because our local practice, which was, yes, very small, but within walking distance of most people in that area, got shut down because it was no longer feasible to have a small practice. So it's seen as an individual, but it's not seen as a valuable asset to that community. So when you're looking at it from a corporate perspective, they're thinking, oh yeah, like we'll just have a centralised, really big practice that everyone can access via online. And then we'll get rid of the small practices so we can invest our money better into that bigger practice. But that small practice is so valuable to people that can't drive, that need something local, that need a doctor that they can rely on, that they can ring up, and it's gone.
Yeah, and of course this links as well to some of the mental health challenges that we all know go on in farming environments, and we don't need to rake over again the fact that many farmers are lone workers, spend long times, you know, not having any other human contact with other people to talk to, which is another major challenge. And I suppose not being able to get access to those services can sort of compound the issue some more. I'd like us to move on and zoom out just for a second to think about something that's we've talked really a lot about what's going on in the UK. So let's talk for a minute about what's happening in a global sense and think about deforestation, water pollution, soil erosion, loss of biodiverse habitats. They're all big challenges. And Lauren, I want to come to you with this one if I can. Do you notice agriculture bringing solutions to this problem? I know I do, which is leading the witness some, but perhaps you can share with us some examples of the way in which agriculture, which gets a hard rap for being part of the problem when it comes to climate change. What do you say to those people who consider agriculture as a force for bad rather than a force for good?
So there are things that people are doing in agriculture. You know, you've got the new SFIs coming in. There are a lot of things that you can do with that. So you've got like wildflower plots, beetle banks. There's loads of things to improve the diversity and biodiversity of the land you've got. People are planting like hedgerows. On my placement, they were planning to plant like a line of trees almost like around the edge of a field. So that's something as well. Another farm that I know, they have, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a scheme where you have a field and it's basically not touched for 5 years and you just let it do what it wants to do. And I think by doing that, it kind of brings in that almost like Mother Nature balance to things, and you're letting the world do what it wants to do. You're letting the planet kind of go, oh, well, that needs fixing, so I'll do that myself, because that's what it did before us. So it's almost like having that balance between us and Mother Nature. And I think we're now slowly allowing that and introducing it instead of going, no, we're in charge here. We're kind of going, actually, we just live here.
Tom, can I bring you in on this one?
That is the options that are spelled out. There needs to be obviously an economic balance. We can touch on food security as well when you're putting too much land into some of these schemes. I know that there's currently now a cap on a lot of these schemes at 25%. Fortunately, DEFRA have released statistics which suggest that the schemes within SFI that are being used are being used the most. I think SAM 2, SAM 3 are two of the key ones there. They can be used in a rotation with an arable or a grassland operation. So you're not taking land out of food production. When you think of the sustainability globally, we've got to remember that the UK is not the only country that produces food. There are a huge number out there that produce food that is not only is it high quality and competes with ours, but also is the yields are a lot higher in some areas. But whether their sustainability content reaches that is a tricky one. When you're looking at the use of soya over in Brazil, a lot of it actually going to produce biofuels and subsidised heavily. So when you're looking to compete against a market like that over in Brazil, it's pretty tough for a UK farmer. When we link that back to sustainability, what are the techniques involved that we can help sort of reduce it and at least have the UK meeting our NFU target of net zero by 2040? Things coming out all the time. So a dairy feed additive called Bovaer recently introduced a 20% reduction in a cow's rumen emissions, whilst not affecting the daily live weight gain and the milk quality of the animal. So really interesting stuff coming out, but let's remember that it is a world field that we're working on ahead of COP.
Thank you, Tom. Loads of interesting stuff in there. Are we ready to get a little bit spicy with the next question? I think, Georgie, I'm going to come to you with this one. So we've had a new government, haven't we, for just over 100 days at the time of this recording, and I'm interested to know what you think we can expect to see from the new government, and also, as a supplementary question, what you might hope for from the new government.
I'd hope that they'd stop comparing themselves to the last government and crack on and get something done and actually put plans into action. I think it's important that they prioritise agriculture. A lot of agricultural side of things perhaps preferred the previous government because they felt a bit more confident in them. Obviously confidence dwindled towards the end, but I think they really need to gain the trust of the agricultural community that they have got them as a priority. Everybody needs food, doesn't matter what colour they're voting for, and it's a certain priority I'd like to hope for, that they do champion that and take on guidance from the NFU, campaigners, that it's so important that we do not lose that. I'm a little bit cautious because they just posted about housing targets, and that's something ridiculous, like 10 times as much as we've built in the last 10 years they want to build in the next 5 or something ridiculous, and that is going to be a huge toll. Like, we're not making any more land. Land is it's a resource that once it's gone, it's gone. Once it's lost its value to grow food, it's gone. So I really hope that they balance, yes, meeting that housing need, but also with the need of championing British agriculture.
Yeah, a really, really interesting answer, Georgie. Thank you. What about the rest of our panel? Do you think it's been just over 100 days? Doing enough? Could do more? What do you think you'd really like to see, Matt?
So, I think one of the most alarming things for me with one of the things that the government's done is Baroness Kate Rock and the Rock Review on farm tenancies. As new entrants, farm tenancies are one of our key routes in. Excuse me. And I think the Rock Review offered a really strong path to securing the tenanted sector for years to come. The fact that the recommendations weren't adopted and the fact that she has now left her post, to me, gives the wrong signal that things aren't heading in the right direction. I also tragically see, and in fact many of the fields near home, I've seen these big solar parks develop now. Yes, in some cases they've been developed by farms, and that has secured the future to enable the next generation to continue farming. But in other cases, such as in East Anglia, when you have this grade 1 amazing soil and you're losing 300 or 400 acres of it at a time, in some cases more, to solar panels, that is very dangerous territory indeed. And the fact that if that's going to continue, that is alarming. Having said that, I think in some cases, renewables have offered an opportunity for farmers, sort of going back to what we said earlier. So, for example, in the hills where wind turbines have been built, there have been access roads built to get to those turbines, which then enable farmers to take quad bikes up. And so when people are saying we need to stop soil erosion or whatever, actually having a permanent track, it does help in that way. So while I'm certainly not opposed to renewables, I'm very pro them in the right circumstances, but I just don't think that a blanket policy of, yes, build more solar panels wherever it is, I don't think that's the right approach.
Tom, Lauren, anything more to add there? Or do we think?
I think just a quick thing is, as long as the government is using the experts in the field to make their decisions and make their informed decisions, approaching the right people and making sure that whatever they implement, they understand the consequences of their actions and what benefits it could produce, as well as the offsetting as best as possible any negatives that come of it.
I would say that I think what a lot of farmers are looking for is just the government support. I think a lot of people were worried that it would, they'd come in and they'd kind of go, right, well, we can get rid of that, and then farmers would kind of be left in the dark, really, and kind of not really know what's going on, and things would be taken away from them. And I think, definitely just kind of support us, help with the schemes that are there, and if there's anything else that they've come up with to help with that, then great.
I'm hearing calls for a plan here, which sounds pretty sensible to me. So let's move things on then. We did promise we'd come back to the consumer, having touched on some of the consumer issues that we were talking about earlier on. And okay, so what can we do to help the general public better understand all of this, and what can we do about it? We've got the School of Sustainable Food and Farming here at Harper Adams, which I think is making a contribution to helping to raise the profile and in its support of farmers. But what do you think we can do? As a group with food producers with a lot of power to make a difference. How can we help consumers better understand the issues that we face? So I was going to come to you first, Matt, with this one.
I think national events, things like Open Farm Sunday, I think that's a really good starting point. Some farmers naturally will reel back from when people say, oh, just diversify, that'll solve your problems. Because actually, if their core business isn't right, and they haven't got the right business approach, then why start another one? I think the core bit, there's a bottom line, which is that. I really think things like Open Farm Sunday, positive engagement with the public are really good. I also think, again, in the dairy sector, I don't want to go too much down this one rabbit hole, there are many in farming, but when I see farmers doing things like on-farm milk machines, or even locally, I think it builds a huge amount of trust and goodwill. There's a farm near home who was one of the first adopters of it in Dorset, and he's now got, I think, 6 or 7 across the county. And just the feedback and support he's had from that has been so positive. And actually, he's had several break-ins. Machines have been robbed, and actually, the way the community have supported him and said, "No, we'll club together and get this mended because we really want to support you in this." So, I think there is a lot of goodwill out there. I think we have there's a lot of such good stuff that happens on the farms. So I think we just need to show people and just be proud of what we're doing. I love going around farms because I'm nosy. I like seeing what people do, and so just when you can go to a farm and the gate's wide open and people are there and looking around and seeing what we're doing, I think it's such a good thing, and it's only going to serve to, I think, improve our sector, because the more the public support farmers, the more the supermarkets and those driving the price will realise. Because if the consumer wants farming to be supported, that's what the supermarkets have to do, because at the end of the day, they're big businesses. They need to do what their customers want.
And we can bring, Matt, can't we, the farmer to the consumer as well. We did
cut the supermarkets out entirely.
Well, yeah.
I'm concerned, bring it on. I know this is a no barriers discussion.
And of course, in the traditional supply chain, we did a piece of work with Morrison's earlier this year, where we took farmers to into the supermarket to not just meet consumers, but also to see their products retailed on the shelves. And many of them had never done that. So, because they're busy making food, they don't often get the opportunity to go and actually see how their food is sold to the customer. And actually, what the real takeaway from that was a greater connection between the product that is produced and where it meets the consumer, and a great deal of pride around, I'm satiating all of these people. I'm bringing nutrients and proteins and other minerals into people's homes, that's driving them on through their lives, at the risk of sounding too lofty about it. But we'll move on now. I'd like us to think about education. We're here at Harper Adams University. You've all been Harper Adams University students, and I want to ask you, and Lauren, I'll come to you first with this. Education, in your view, what role do you think education plays in supporting sustainable production and the transition to sustainable practice?
I think it's a very big role. If you're not taught it, you're not going to know about it. I also think there's not enough of it, especially around farming, and especially for young people who are going to either be going into a farming community or as a consumer. A lot of people look at things on social media and they believe one thing they see, whereas if you're actually learning about it in schools from reliable people and reliable sources, you can then actually get an opinion from it, knowing that what you've been told is the truth. And I think that's definitely really important. I think as a young kid, if I'd been taught about farming and agriculture and being more sustainable and things like that, I would have been doing things that I do now from a younger age. And I think it's the same for a lot of people, people older than me, and also people that are younger than me in secondary school and things like that. I think if you went up to them and said, "Oh, would you like to learn about this? Would you like to learn about how farmers can be more sustainable, how you can be more sustainable and educate other people?" I don't think there'd be many people who would say no to that. I think it's definitely a big role. And if you can educate not only school children, but also consumers in the wider world, through adverts on TV. I think the Back British Farming advert, that normally comes up, and it's kind of like Buy British. One of those adverts that comes up is great. The Look for the Red Tractor. People listen to that. So why won't they listen to being more sustainable and how to help with that?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I think that's really interesting.
Tom, education, you are doing for your sins a master's as well as your undergraduate degree here at Harper Adams, and now in your role at AHDB, a big aspect of your role is sharing knowledge. Exactly. So tell me more. What's your interest here, and what role do you see education playing?
So education, as we've heard, as it is quite obvious in the industry, is key to a lot of what we do. It's having someone who has come up with an idea, come up with a concept, whether it's a product, a technique, and transferring that from the expert. How do we transfer that knowledge to the farmer, to the end user? And in many ways, I'm educating the consumer about the techniques, about the way their food is produced and what is beneficial and what isn't beneficial for the environment. And somewhere like Harper Adams is a great way to, I'd recommend anyone looking at their farming journey and learning about sustainable agriculture, profitable agriculture. But then, that knowledge exchange role the AHDB plays at being impartial, providing evidence-based knowledge to farmers, to the industry, across the supply chain, and making sure that it's credible. That's the big key word there, is being able to trust that information is what you anticipate it to be. Because a lot of consumers, they'll see a branding, they'll see a message on the food they're buying, but it's about actually believing that that is true, high in protein, sustainable, it's using regenerative techniques. Well, it's what are those? I'm educating what those are. You know, a really, really big role that plays.
And from the point of view of farmers who, many people, as you'll know, have been working in farming all their lives. It's all they've ever known. They've done things the way they've done them for a long time. There is a challenge, we know, don't we, around some degree of change resistance in the agricultural sector. So, Georgie, what do you think? I mean, what's our opportunity to help people perhaps who are ripe for upskilling in the farming workforce? How do we reach those people, and how do we empower them to produce food more sustainably?
I think the information has got to be accessible and without a price. A lot of these seminars or come along to this or join this programme come at a price, which puts people off accessing that information, because for them it needs to essentially be so readily available they can't miss it. And a lot of the times, companies that are putting out this information or putting out these information exchanges or grow your skill sets are doing it for their own gain of the company rather than for the gain of the farmer and the end user, like Tom said. And I think part of the older mindset, I don't mean to put an age on it, but I've been sat at the table and you've got a young generation coming through, and you've got the older generation, we've always done it this way and I don't see why we need to change. And that kind of mindset is only going to change with accessible information and getting them to come to something. There has to be, as simple as a cup of tea and a piece of cake there, and just have a chat and let's look at how we can grow your skill set. And I think more of that needs to be done as a collaborative approach as well. So, rural surveyors, rural professionals, people like yourself, like in knowledge exchange positions, need to be available at these events or seminars or information exchanges and kind of drop the competitive edge to do the right thing by the farmer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is fascinating. I think there's a lot in there that I really agree with. I think it's really important. So lastly, guys, I'd like to end as we look towards Azerbaijan, which is happening very soon, COP29, a meeting of world leaders, all talking about the issues that we've talked about here today. And I would like you to think about the one thing that you would really like to ask or challenge our world leaders to consider at COP29. So Georgie, I'm coming to you first. What would you like to be able to influence at COP29 if you were there this year?
I think obviously climate is always prioritised at COP29 and how the world leaders can come together to create targets. I just hope that food security isn't at the bottom of the pile after those targets have been agreed. I think we've got to ensure that first and foremost, and not just for the UK, worldwide, securing food, and then build realistic targets based off what is achievable to ensure that everyone's fed still. So
Yeah.
Nice. Matt?
I would actually say have some compassion, please. There are a lot of people pushing for electric cars and things like that to be universally rolled out. There are so many people who can't afford to drive an electric car, or to buy one rather. It's not practical for them to have an electric car because they live in a tower block or there's not space. And actually, please stop blackmailing people and saying that you are a really bad person for enjoying a beef steak, because actually beef and agriculture as a whole they hold the answers to so many of these things.
And Matt, I think we could do an entire session on that. So hold that thought. I think you make some really great points. Lauren, what are your thoughts?
I would say, going back to the education, both farmers and consumers need to have an understanding of it, because if they don't understand it, then you can't do anything. You've got to have an understanding before actually having an action towards it, because your action is showing that you've got an understanding, but if you don't have that, then you can't actually efficiently do it. And I think if consumers have an understanding, then that can almost help farmers do things because they know that the consumers want that. And by farmers understanding it, it then helps the consumers understand it because that will be through advertisement and it will be on the labelling of products and they'll go, it's got this, that's what I want.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. Tom?
I just hope for some actual collaboration. I think it's listening to the experts, the people in the know, and it's each country that are joining together at COP29. If they're going to make a decision, it's all coming to the decision together, sticking to that decision, and putting a firm commitment, or wherever that may be. But it can't just be done by one country. Us as the UK, whether it's us, whether it's who knows what country, it doesn't matter if one country moves. This whole topic is a worldwide issue, and I hope that does happen.
Thank you, Tom. And that ends our session. So Tom, Lauren, Matt, Georgie, thank you very much for joining us today. Really enjoyed today. I hope you have too. And thank you to everybody else who's joined us. We look forward to seeing you on the next video. And in the meantime, keep watching Countryside COP. There is a load of content that you can view, and we'll all look forward to COP29 and what comes from that. Thank you.